right, welcome everybody. Welcome to this week's delayed by a couple days live stream event for Influxer's educational series. Apologize, that is absolutely my fault. That was the result of me trying a new restaurant and it not working out too well for me. A little 14 pounds lighter this week, so yay. A little too much detail there, but I am really super excited about today's guest, Matt Banker, MB Sports Consulting. You've seen him on D1 Ticker, College Sports. You've seen him all over the place. Matt Banker has been around the block and then some. What a lot of folks don't know is Matt and I were actually classmates in law school together at Marquette University Law School way back in the day. I don't want to say way back too much here, but we're both showing the gray hair, so it's all right. But Matt and I have known each other for a very long time. His path to today, after leaving Marquette, has been a very interesting road indeed. Just in terms of working at the NCAA, the assistant dean of a law school at Indiana, and then at the University of Louisville for almost 10 years there, and he's been around in a couple different capacities, and I think where Matt is today, he's doing a lot of consulting for as part of his own sports consulting firm. And he's doing a little teaching here on the side, which I've done as well. And I think that's where I have a real appreciation for where Matt comes from on a lot of these things when we enter into education for student athletes and NIL. I think he's a wealth of knowledge. I think if folks are looking for a consultant, there's obviously a lot of consulting firms out there. Matt's definitely somebody that's been around the block, got worldwide perspective on a lot of different things. So I'm going to go ahead and shamelessly plug Matt, not just because he's a friend, but because he's good and he knows what he's talking about. And so I told Matt I was going to brag on him just a little bit. Proud to know Matt. Proud to be able to call on him, and when I told him about this educational series, no hesitation. He was all for helping student athletes out. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you Matt Banker. I'll let you go ahead and say hello and go for it.
Yeah, great. Keith, thanks for having me. Super kind words. Appreciate that, buddy. And just great to be part of this conversation. And kudos to you for getting this kind of content out there and all the things you've done up to date. So that's fantastic. And I'm with you. Anything we can do to help even one person today that's trying to navigate the NIL space is a win. And looking forward to our chat today.
And I think that's where today's topic, I know when I gave you the topic, and often, I go around to a lot of schools, and as I know you do, you make your way around to a lot of schools, doing some speeches. And, I found that this topic has largely gone not talked about. I don't even want to say ignored. I just don't think there's a lot of folks, even in athletic administration, that is aware of this subset of federal guidelines that's out there. And, today's topic, we're talking about the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, regulations for social media influencers. And, the FTC has actually got a really fascinating, guide out there, and we'll put that guide here in the chat. Our man behind the scenes here today is Steve McLean, and he'll get that up in the chat here. But I think it is an absolutely phenomenal resource, and I think the consequences for not following these FTC guidelines rather quite severe. As I've presented and talked with people, it's always, okay, what's the penalty for that? And, everybody tries to weigh the risk versus the reward type of thing. You know, as I read like the black letter law, it's 40 up to $44,000 an infraction for a social media influencer for failing to disclose that they're being paid to do some content. Now, I've not seen any student athletes get fined for this yet. Am I missing something? Have you seen anything along that line?
I haven't, and I think a couple of thoughts around the FTC's guidelines, and you mentioned it, Keith, is just they've created what they're calling a 101, which is great. And one thing I do have to commend them on is not all of the layers of policy and rules that govern NIL have come with actual guidance that I think college athletes can take and digest and apply. But in this case, it's out there, and it's actually quite helpful, and understandable at a fundamental level. So to your point about sort of the risk reward and the consequences, I haven't seen that, and hopefully that's intentional in the sense of you have a lot of young people, college athletes coming forward, getting into the NIL space, maybe having no background around endorsing a product or service, and trying to use this as a teachable moment. But as it goes, the FTC is a federal agency. This is federal law. And also a quick reminder that college athletes traditionally have been used to really NCAA rules governing their day to day. That's still true, but we also have additional layers in the NIL space. And this is one of those examples. You have federal laws, you have state laws, you have institutional policies around NIL. And so when we talk about different layers of rules applying to college athletes doing NIL activities, FTC and federal regulations, which there are dozens of them, are certainly in play. But I'm hopeful today we can sort of boil it down to that this is about consumer protection. And we're all consumers. Every single day we have to stop and think about it. But if you're driving down the street and you're seeing advertising on a billboard, or you're seeing it as you're at home scrolling on your phone and looking at ads that are kind of just coming by, that's what the FTC is out there to protect the consumer base that's looking at this type of advertising, the promotions, and saying, look, there's an interest for us to protect consumers that they're not misled. And so now that college athletes have certainly entered that space because it's permissible now to endorse products and services, they're going to look at that as well. They're going to look at college athletes' social media influencing activity in particular, but really any ads you're doing, whether it shows up on a TV commercial or a billboard or anything else, including social media. So at a baseline, it's one of many rules that college athletes certainly need to be keeping an eye on. I know you mentioned we'll be dropping in the chat here the actual 101 document. It's about 7-8 pages long, but it's very sort of user friendly and really cuts to the point of what do I need to do and how do I need to stay in front of this so we don't need to be thinking about fines and penalties and warning letters and things like that.
That's 100% right. And I, I have been fascinated as I do visit some campuses and do have some conversations, with compliance officers and NIL directors, and I ask them, a lot of questions. I try to gauge, what the education level has been, what the content has been, at various places, and whenever I get to this question, I feel like I always get a sheepish answer, you know, and I don't know that it's folks just blatantly ignoring, that it's out there. I think it's just that folks don't know it's out there. And so I'm hoping with today's session, we garner a little bit of attention, so any of the NIL directors, compliance officers, or, there's a lot of NIL agents out there that I'm pretty sure, quite honestly, just aren't aware of this. And this is something I think, for the protection of all student athletes, really wanted to bring attention to. It is ironic, that on a day where, there's lots of news of different different folks being in Washington, D.C., lobbying for federal legislation. um, that there is federal legislation out there that has gone largely ignored, which is a little bit ironic by the same constituents. Um, so really getting into the nuts and bolts here, I think you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. This is about consumer protection. When we're talking about social media influencing, and we're talking about, what I mean, that's basically what the FTC does is consumer protection. And, when student athletes are getting paid to endorse a product or to do some sort of collaboration, and that's the one fascinating thing that I do recognize from the FTC document. They say just saying you're a collaborator is not enough, and I find that fascinating. You have to be very clear with your wording. If there's any type of financial, any type of family connection with what you're saying on your social media post, that you're getting in some way, shape, or form compensated for, you have to clearly state that. And it's very interesting as you get into that FTC document, mixing something up with and hashtags paid collab. It doesn't seem like that's enough according to the federal government. Is that how you look at that?
That's absolutely right, and it's really about, and they make this clear. Ironically, this is what they're getting to is make that clear in your posts,
Mm-hmm.
that you have that material connection with a company, and you mentioned a few really good examples, Keith. Obviously, financial, you're being compensated, and they make the point too that includes free product, and I wanted to stress that today because a lot of the transactions from day one to date, NIL wise, has been about, we're going to send you a case of free product, whatever that might be, nutrition supplements or apparel or whatever it might be. That's still considered compensation. So just because you're not, quote unquote, getting paid in dollars, you still may have a financial relationship with a company. And also sometimes you find college athletes who might have the time, although their time certainly is pretty well spoken for, is employment or some other capacity in which you are working for maybe a company in the summertime, for example. So any of those types of relationships, whether it's employment, financial, personal relationships, a family member owns a company and you're out there endorsing it, you'd want to disclose that as well. So and your second point, there's really worth reiterating is make it clear, make it simple, and as transparent as possible. So when they think about even post, stating that in there that, hey, I'm a partner with ABC company, or I'm an ambassador for, and you can do it in a way that's also sort of in a positive sort of promotional way. Hey, I'm excited to be a partner with this company, and here's why. And then maybe you also add hashtag ambassador, hashtag sponsor, those kinds of things. But that makes it clear. Think about if you role reversed and you were that consumer, or you saw that post and you wanted to know, like, oh, okay, they're really excited about this product, but it's also good to know that they're paid to put that out there. And so that's certainly sort of the baseline, and that's what that 101 document rolls through in part. Another piece I think that's really important, in addition to that disclosure of the relationship, is just being honest about what you're saying. And
Mm-hmm.
that includes if you're saying this is the best product ever. So if it's a nutrition supplement, make sure you have used the product. I think that's one of the clear best practices and even expectations that the FTC has put forward is, if you said you use the product, then make sure you have used the product. And be honest about what your endorsement is. If you don't like it, you shouldn't be out saying it's the best thing ever. So those are a couple of things related to how you actually endorse, what you're actually saying, in conjunction with your actual experience with the product. And another piece too and this is something the FTC keeps an eye on, and we'll give an example that does tie to sports in general that the FTC certainly got involved in, is if you're making a claim about the product doing something, for example, and I'm just making this as a generic example, is, hey, if you use these training shoes that you're endorsing, it takes a half second off your 40-yard dash time. you better have that in evidence that there's some scientific studies saying that that's going to happen. Obviously, that's probably unrealistic, but that's the type of thing that the FTC would flag and say, hey, hang on a minute, you're saying that this is happening. People are relying on what you're stating to make a purchasing decision. And so if that's out there, we'd love to see what study, what survey, what research that this is based in fact, in evidence, as the FTC shares it. And it's not hyperbole that you're just making these claims to help promote and drive sales. And so the example I can give, even from the last few years, and this predates NIL. So the FTC, as Keith, you know, and we all recognize that a lot of the laws that now apply to NIL weren't created recently. A lot of these have existed for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
For protection, obviously, has been a general interest for many years. And so the point there is that they've got a lot of background in looking at a variety of companies in a variety of categories. But one that I wanted to use, just as I won't state the company, but an apparel company that claimed that had an athlete actually using the product and claimed that it helped with, you know, back strain and chronic back pain and those types of things after your workout. The FTC went in to inquire about that a little further, and fast forward, that company ended up receiving a significant fine, over $1 million fine, because it wasn't evidence-based at all. Now, to be clear, that they were targeting the company itself, not necessarily the spokesperson or influencer. But that's where you see it's really important for college athletes to be thinking about, what am I saying? Do I believe it? Is it true? Is it honest? And is it accurate? If you're comfortable with that sort of self-barometers, then you're going to be fine, in addition to disclosing the material relationship. But you really don't want to get into making fantastic claims that just aren't based in fact or some sort of study. And that's something to look out for as you're thinking about NIL deals. And the last thing I wanted to add to that, Keith, is a lot of times the companies with these NIL transactions will give the student athlete a specific script about what they want you to post, not just when and how often, and that'll be included in NIL contracts too. But exactly, here's what we want you to post next week, Thursday, and then 2 weeks from now, and all those sorts of good things. But the language of what they're asking you to say, that's something for the athletes themselves to take a closer look at. Make sure it aligns with what we're sharing today, and what that, in particular, what the FTC guidance says about making it accurate and honest, aside from just disclosing that you're endorsing that company, that if they're asking you to say certain things about the product itself, that it is evidence-based and that it in fact aligns with your opinion on it.
Excellent points. You hammered multiple points there home. You know, it's amazing. I do look at social media. I do see things, and I do kind of grimace sometimes. I'm like, I'm sure you have as well. And, you know, I'm not going to name names or companies, you know, when I see that's not the purpose of today, you know, but I do always feel that temptation to reach out and say, hey, you need to go back and correct this, you know, just, I don't want to see any student athlete become the example for this. But I think you're right, though. You know, certainly the student athletes involved could be, you know, they could find fault. They could find themselves at the wrong end of some penalties. But certainly businesses that are getting involved in these transactions, they need to be aware of this as well. And I think when you get into the science-based, you know, making sure the evidence there is there to back it up, 100% real. I know you're a college football student athlete, were you not?
I was, yes.
Up in Minnesota, correct?
Cold footballs.
Yeah.
Cold.
But I remember back in the day, you know, being a sucker, buying some shoes that, you know, made me jump higher, you know, or said to make me jump higher, or said to make me quicker, you know. And as I've grown and I've gotten more knowledgeable about this business, I'm like, really, I don't, you know, boy, I fell for some stuff back in the day, you know, buying some weird shoes because I thought it was going to make me better in sports. And, you know, nowadays with the evolution of the FTC, a lot of that stuff that, you know, you better be prepared to back it up, because, just doing I would encourage any student athlete or administrator out there, to Google whatever search engine you use. I'm not endorsing Google, but you look up FTC, look up penalties, social media influencers. You'll be astonished when you start looking at what you're going to find out there. And I think NIL is still somewhat new, where folks don't quite grasp, you know, the severity of this. I think in my mind, I kind of analogize this to some of the like Office of Civil Rights and penalties and some of those things, as some of the universities will look. They're aware that they're out there. They're aware there's some fines. Whether there's going to be some fines coming, you know, it's kind of far in the background to them. But I know when I get on campus and I start mentioning FTC and I talk about this topic, sometimes I've run into some confusion by student athletes where, student athletes are going, they'll ask me, well, what's the, so if I'm going through a drive-through restaurant and I get a particular sandwich, again, not naming any restaurants or any particular sandwich, if I go through a drive-through and there's a sandwich that I get and it absolutely rocks and is really good, and I tweet about it or Instagram post about it, and am I okay? Yes, you're okay, as long as you're not being financially compensated for it. You're not being paid, as you said, in gifts, products, services, or money, in exchange for what you're putting out there on content. And I try to explain that difference. The drive-through example is a good one that I use on campuses to really push that point home. And I think student athletes have really understood that when I've gone out and spoke on campus. When you've been able to present and kind of illustrate this to student athletes, what's a good way that you've been able to convey this point?
Yeah, I think that example you provided is very relatable. Going through the drive-through and also just saying, hey, as a 20-year-old college athlete, I just love this sandwich or this cup of coffee, whatever we're talking about, and also know that I have no affiliation, I have no other motive or incentive or relationship that's driving this. It's purely just, I think this is great. Every Friday I treat myself to XYZ in the morning, cup of coffee or whatever. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. The other side to that too is if you are looking to market yourself and those types of things, and think about, and this is a little bit different than the FTC guidelines, going a little bit off topic, but that's where athletes can also drive some ideas of, think about the products you do like. That's a good starting point. Then you're already going to be honest about it if you like the product. Now, doesn't mean everything you purchase throughout your week is going to lead to an NIL deal, but those are the kind of things where from time to time you do see athletes sort of self-generate some opportunities based on just sort of reflecting on, what do I like, what am I ordering online, from Amazon that comes here, or what do I like to eat, where do my friends and I hang out for lunch, whatever it might be. So that's just a sort of a little addition there. But the other thing too about on-campus education is, hopefully, and I don't know if anyone in our audience today touches on the life skills curriculum or has any responsibility in that area, or the athletes that may be on today, is to talk to those folks that are always trying to cultivate resources like this. And you make a good point that there's so much out there that touches NIL. We talked about that at the start today. It's not just NCAA rules. You have state laws, you have federal laws, you have institutional policies. There's just a lot at play here. And because of that, you have people who want to be helpful and point to all the different types of things that could apply without trying to overwhelm. This is where I think the FTC's done a really nice job with that, because there's some other areas of NIL for other policies, whether it's the state or federal level or even locally at the campus level, that probably could be better in terms of like getting the word out about, here's what you need to do, or here's what you need to avoid. So as you mentioned, on any search engine, check out the FTC 101 document, but also your life skills lead person, usually one of the athletic administrators in your athletics department, is a great resource for things like this and maybe others that could apply, whether it's how or if you can use your university's logos and marks and what you're doing, NIL. I mean, the list goes on and on. So this is another example, but at the end of the day, this is one of those, I think, to go back to your drive-through analogy, is to also think about if the roles were reversed and you were a consumer, what wouldn't you want to know that someone was being compensated or was really had an official capacity with a company that are making this promotion, making that social media post. So but I think the example you gave is a great one. So anything that's sort of a day-to-day thing, but it's really done on your own volition. No one's asked you to post that. You're not being compensated to do it. You have no relationship with that restaurant. I think for sure, you're in the clear. But when you start having those connections to a company and that product, that's when you have to be really transparent.
I do find it funny when I see some of the posts from student athletes. Hey, so-and-so company looking for an endorsement, available, love your blankety blank, I do enjoy those posts because I think you're right. You got to market yourself and, hey, company XYZ, I love your product. I'm available for NIL. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned too, just about the FTC. One other thing to offer today is that the FTC does issue notices. It doesn't necessarily mean the companies are in trouble. But if you go back, you'll see sort of their own official notices, warnings, or really to say, hey, company, double check how your advertising campaign's running. But when we talk about the term due diligence, that's what we mean. One thing you'll see in the FTC guidance is also, student athletes, this is your responsibility. It's not someone else's. So sometimes amongst all the guidance here, it's not to forget that you need to take ownership over looking at this. Someone's not necessarily going to do that for you. And so, for example, being given a script about what you need to post, you really need to take ownership of looking at that and saying, hey, wait a minute, you're saying that the product is going to do X, Y, Z. Is there a study or is there some report that substantiated that? Those are the types of things we mean by due diligence. But you can also research the company itself, including if they've had any engagement with the FTC. If the FTC has said, hey, we're going to look at, and they post, there's scores of companies that get reviewed. So, and it touches in a variety of categories, right, in the marketplace. So, and that includes companies that are in like nutrition supplements, apparel, the types of companies we are seeing athletes engage in from an NIL standpoint, as well as many, many other companies across the spectrum. So the FTC is a resource in that way too. If you've got a company and you're like, oh, let me see what I can find out about this company and its background. One area to look is if they've had engagement with the FTC.
And I can't emphasize enough to anybody that's out there, student athlete, whether you're an NIL company agent, whether you're a school administrator, the FTC 101 document is absolutely golden. It is very good. It is very concise, very clear as to what should and should not be happening in this space. I do find it, there are some things that, can raise a few eyebrows and you're like, ooh, I don't know that that's always happening, but one thing that as I go through the document and I underscore is, it plainly tells, social media endorsers, influencers, that it is their responsibility to make sure this happens. It is their responsibility. So in this case, we're talking about student athletes. It is the student athlete's responsibility to make sure, these types of disclosures are made according to FTC guidelines. I see statements like that and I'm like, yeah, I understand why that's there. I do. But I do understand these are our student athletes. They're still learning the business, sort of say, and they are leaning on people for advice. This is where, I do feel like it's incumbent upon, some of the older folks in the room that are taking this responsibility of advising student athletes to make sure, these types of things are known. It's a shame to go through, you mentioned a variety, whole litany of different obstacles, rules, regulations, different organizational entities that you have to go through. To go through all that, and then at the very end to bungle it up, for lack of a better phrase, by not doing the disclosure correctly, it would just be a shame. Because you and I both know, having worked NIL deals, these things do not happen very quickly, and they're often very tangled, and it takes a little while to develop, to make sure everybody's happy and satisfied, to get to that 140 character tweet. Um, it does take quite a bit to get to the very end, and to have it kind of bungled up is just awful. So one thing I would recommend, to anybody that's out there, download the FTC 101 document. To be clear, I am not a paid endorser of the FTC. Neither is Matt. We're just two guys that want to make sure that folks out there are aware of what's out there legislatively. I mean, this is something of critical importance. And if you are a company, and I think, for a lot of the small mom and pop companies, that are getting into this NIL arena right now, they're not fully aware. A lot of folks jumped into, yes, I want to do NIL. I want to be a part of this crazy new era. And, where they might not have used social media influencers previously, they might not be aware of different things along this line. I'm not sure if anybody from the FTC is listening today, but would definitely love to get somebody on at some point. And, from there, maybe they can give us some examples and of different things they're seeing, because I'm sure you and I have not seen anything that they talk about or discuss on their end. But I think they have done a pretty good job with their educational documents, and I would tell anybody out there, download, distribute it to your student athletes. When you hire somebody like Matt or myself, or there's several other educators out there, this is the type of things that you are paying for when you're bringing in an experienced speaker. Is you're bringing in somebody with this type of knowledge to understand all the little nooks and crannies that are, for a large part, going unnoticed sometimes. Let's lighten the mood just a little bit. I mentioned my embarrassing past of buying some shoes based on, I thought I was going to be able to slam dunk a little bit better. You know what shoes I'm talking about, right, Matt?
Vaguely, yes. I can picture them. I don't know if I remember the brand, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the brand either, but they had the little elevated thing on the toes, and they're guaranteed to help me jump higher and help me slam dunk. Didn't happen. I could touch the rim, but that was about it. But did you ever get suckered in on something where, in your past, where you're like, man, where were you, FTC?
There's probably happened a few times. I think we've all, big and small, hopefully more small transactions where you're like, that may have not lived up to the billing.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think about it too, it sort of relates to the more we transact electronically, how we order products online, all those sorts of things. Obviously, social media is where a lot of advertising and marketing and information lives in today's age. So I think about that as you don't have as many opportunities to literally take a look at something in your hand before you buy it, because we're doing more of our buying independently and having it arrive at our doorstep after we've purchased. So, but yeah, this is all about it. And as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you could just, these aren't insurmountable things. These are very manageable. That's the other thing too, is that, like, in the grand scheme of things, this is something that is very manageable for college athletes to incorporate it, and probably just getting a good habit of checking, disclosing the relationship, those kinds of things. But also, it's affecting reputation too. So the FTC and them inquiring about something that may not be accurate is one thing, but it also, for future opportunities, you've kind of harmed your reputation if you're making claims about something that aren't completely accurate, and people lose trust of you. It's your name, image, likeness
Right.
as being a spokesperson. It's funny. I want to go back just a minute as you mentioned hey, we're not endorsing the FTC, but that made me think of something that is in their document is really about live streams, audio, video, those kind of things. Like, it's not just about disclosing it in writing in your social media post, but if you're actually posting a video on TikTok or something like that, you've also got to include that there. And that may include repeating it at least, a couple of times so that the viewers who jump on and, watch whatever the endorsement is are informed that, in fact, you have that relationship with a company.
No, that's a great point. And I believe in, when I reviewed, some of the FTC's literature, like regarding Instagram, it wasn't enough just to be in the caption. There had to be something else visually on screen, that really captured that disclosure as well. So you're dead right. Just in terms of like videos and stuff. Glad I could help you, with that point.
I think about products that may say this is long-lasting flavored gum, and you buy that, and the flavor is gone in 20 seconds. So, like, we've all been, run into that, those kinds of things. But as being a commercial spokesperson, which in the end is what a social media influencer is, it's really important to sort of make sure you're going forward and covering yourself and protecting yourself FTC wise, reputation wise on these types of things.
And I love the fact that when Influxer, we're doing these live stream videos, we're posting them, for people, we're recording them, posting the videos on, and eventually we'll splice some of these up and get these out on social media. Some nice little tidbits of information and advice for folks. Good healthy reminders. Not to like really drone on and on about different things, but like if you could sum up and like give me your elevator pitch, for your 30-second. Is that the elevator pitch time length? Give me your 30 seconds.
Depends on what floor you're on.
That's true. Let's say you work at the top, your penthouse level. Your experience, your penthouse level, buddy. So,
well, I guess my elevator speech on this topic today is, as a college athlete, keep your message simple and clear. Be transparent and be honest about what you're saying. You hit those marks, you're going to be fine. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more. So now, you and I share something in common. I spent a couple decades on campus in compliance. You're at Louisville for like 10 years in the compliance role there. And I know from my experience, seeing the simple things like this, where a simple disclosure would have alleviated everything at the outset. Where from an NCAA rule standpoint, there was other things where it's like, gosh, what you did was actually okay had you done this small little step. This small little step would have made it okay. And I'm sure you experienced things like that in the past as well. Any other like examples come to mind that would make for a good reminder or an analogy?
Sure. NIL wise, I guess, part of it is just asking the questions, because, and I put myself in the college athlete's position today as like, gosh, this is overwhelming. There's so many different guidance. I have a variety of people, my coaches, the life skills advisor, sport administrator, compliance, my academic advisor. They have all given me input and advice, all well-intended and hopefully for the most part accurate. But there's just a lot out there is to ask questions. And, Keith, you make a really good point. It's like a little bit of just this diligence of making sure you learn and cover a small step, which in this realm is pretty manageable, is just going to save you a bigger headache. And you see that all the time, whether you're talking in college sports or beyond, is, it's easier to address something on the front end and to also, if it doesn't go out the right way, or you didn't get as transparent or clear about your affiliation, for example, then correct it and make it clear, and those kinds of things. As they say, problems don't age well. Unresolved things don't age well. So the more you just leave it untouched, the more likely, you might be inviting a bigger problem or headache. So trying to get those things, nip them in the bud, and this is actually really good training from a business standpoint. You think about those who aspire to start their own business, get into the business world, maybe want to become a CEO. This is great training ground for that. And so, think about all the other little decisions and questions that come up in a college athlete's life. And you asked, like, for an analogy, if you didn't know for sure when the team bus was leaving, would you ask someone? You bet you don't want to miss the bus. And that can happen. And there's a million pieces of information. And maybe you're studying for a test. And wait, are we leaving at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. tomorrow morning? You don't want to leave that to chance. And so you have so many of those little things that come up in your day-to-day as a college athlete. This is similar to that. Just kind of paying attention, get the detail right, and you're good. And you won't have to think about it again.
That is an awesome analogy, because that immediately brings up some bad memories of having to deal with certain situations where, there are coaches that, hey, bus leaves at 6 a.m., not 7 a.m. Either you're on or you're not, and they will leave. I've definitely been part of some of those conversations in the past. So that's a very good analogy. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and borrow that one when I'm on campus talking a little bit. That's a great one.
It's very relatable to everybody, whether you're a coach or an athlete or an administrator. Everyone's got to get on the bus.
I got to give you that. That's a great one. We got a few minutes left. Tell me a little bit more about what you're doing. You're doing stuff with MB Sports Consulting. Really proud of what you're doing out there with that, and constantly see you you're usually the one doing the interviewing these days, not being interviewed. So tell me a little bit more about what you're doing out there, so folks are aware of Matt Banker if they're not already.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. And it's all tied to college sports, sort of my consulting practice, and started this last year, something I've been thinking about for a few years. As you mentioned, I spent many years on campus at the University of Louisville, had the great opportunity working both in compliance as a sport administrator for a few sports, helped actually launch the whole NIL program, the policies, kind of what that looked like, and many relationships built around that at Louisville. I've worked at a conference office for a few years, the Ohio Valley Conference in Division I, and obviously prior steps, and then, of course, law school as classmates with you. And my practice today is all tied to college sports in a few ways. So as you mentioned, I do the journalistic thing from time to time as a guest interviewer for D1 Ticker and all the Ticker sort of families, which is a prominent email news listserv, if you will, for the college athletic space. Really enjoyed that. It's a great way to reconnect with people like you, who are in the industry that I've known for years, and meet some new people that are out there as well. So really enjoyed serving them and having them as a client. I'm also part of the team at CCHA, which is a law firm out of Indianapolis that our practice team focuses on sports law. So we do everything from representing schools and coaches in NCAA proceedings to helping schools review Title IX matters and sport portfolios, to helping with transfer waivers. So very much student athlete specific things, as well as some NIL transactional pieces. And then I also have other clients that may be national governing bodies to conference offices and things like that. So they all sort of intersect, certainly driven by my background in college sports and higher education. And they've really enjoyed it so far to date. And taking time to have conversations like this is awesome, and including in the NIL space. And as you mentioned, we're keeping an eye on what's going to happen. We talk about policies. We think there may be more to come. Wouldn't be shocking, if that can play out. But college sports is in the most, I'll say, both volatile and opportunistic. There's just a lot going on, not necessarily meaning in a negative connotation, but there's so much going on that you really have to stay on top of these things that continue to trend and change, like NIL did, and is really changing what college sports look like day to day. So I'm trying to help those who are involved in that, whether you're an athlete, a family, trying to navigate this for your son or daughter, or the universities, colleges, companies, et cetera.
Outstanding. And one of the things I've appreciated about being in this NIL space, sometimes we'll work on similar things, but being able to have a network to bounce things off of it is really a phenomenal aspect to building this type of network up, and being able to call on somebody like you to be part of this educational live stream has been really a valuable asset. And I'll do a shameless plug here for Influxer. One of the things we've really tried to do when we're on campus is really educate about these things. I get it. I've been on a compliance staff, and sometimes people don't want to hear all the little nitty gritty details. But I think everything we talked about here today is really important stuff, and I'm hoping folks really take the time to understand what we're talking about. Is good information. This is federal stuff. This is not NCAA. This is not state law. This is big time stuff. But I think you really nailed it too. With one final thought here is student athletes really need to think about their brand too, and investigating, doing research, and because I'm definitely seeing the student athletes that are out there endorsing, receiving free products for nutritional things, and they might not actually know what is in those things, or they might not have done a lot of investigation first. And so I think the FTC stuff should give enough student athletes pause to stop and really think about these types of things and make sure they're asking the right questions.
Yeah, and just maybe a final thought on that is, nutritional supplements. That's a category that's very active in this space in NIL, which is great. But at the same time, another set of rules is related to sort of banned substances. That hasn't changed for the most part in the last few years because of NIL for sure. But there's some things that are out there with some nutritional supplements that, as you said it, Keith, right on target, is you got to know what you're ingesting, and that's a whole other set of a conversation. But as it relates to NIL, slowing down, doing your diligence, just making good informed decisions includes maybe avoiding a bigger headache that actually can impact your eligibility. Of all things, the last thing you want to affect from an NIL transaction, but that's where these things all kind of touch each other in a way.
Yep. I think we could schedule about 19 more sessions talking about various things that we hit on today. So thanks a lot, Matt, for joining us today. And we'll certainly we'll look forward to sharing this and getting this out there, and appreciate talking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Keith. Great to see you, buddy.
See ya.